Purchasing insurance is often seen as a necessary purchase and has been dominated with major players for decades, if not longer. With a new wave of digital-first insurers coming to market, traditional marketing practices have to be reimagined. Jill Robb is joined by Noreen Fadenhauer, Chief Marketing Officer at Openly, to discuss what the future of marketing looks like for the insurtech industry.
Hi everyone, I'm delighted to be welcoming Noreen Fadenhauer from Openly.com, an insurtech based out of Boston and Massachusetts, to have a fireside chat with us today and tell us a little bit about Openly.com and Noreen herself. And Noreen, you're in the role of CMO at Openly. Let's start with a little bit of insight about you. You know, what is the one thing we absolutely should know about you and your background?
Let's see. So yes, I've been in marketing for over 20 years. And I think one thing to know about me from that perspective is I'm really passionate about what the end user thinks. So I know marketing is always really funny, right? Because we're all consumers, we all have opinions, and everyone tends to get really excited about marketing, which I love, right? We all have our opinions of products we love and messaging we love and brands we love. But I'm really passionate about, when you're at a business, what do your end consumers, customers think, and really staying close to them and continue to have a dialogue with them. So I think that's kind of an important thing to know about me, just generally.
And you mentioned brands there. Actually, do you have is there a brand? And obviously, you're very much speaking from the North American standpoint here. Is there a brand that you look at and think they've got it? What they're doing is really, really good.
Yeah. So from an insurance, I'll answer that in two ways. One, from an insurance perspective, another kind of non-insurance, because I love thinking about cross-category learnings and how, industries like insurance and insurtech can look at really other categories like retail and kind of learn from them and borrow interesting things from them. So from an insurance perspective, I really admire brands that are trying to humanize and make insurance more accessible and not this, really big, scary, complex sounding thing. So there's a couple that I especially admire, in the life insurance space in particular. These are North American brands, but Bestow and Haven Life, they've really tried to take the language of insurance and make it something that, dare I say, almost sounds fun to the end consumer. So I think that's an exciting thing kind of happening with brands in the insurance space that I really look at and admire. In terms of broader brands, two that kind of stand out that I tend to just look at, and these are kind of just large iconic brands, but one is Disney for their use of data to really always continually improve that customer experience, always thinking about how they can smartly use data to continually improve what that looks like and how the end customer interacts with their brand. And the other one I think that is interesting, especially in the insurance space, is Amazon with looking at product recommendations. So I think that's something that a lot of folks in the insurance and insurtech space are trying to emulate. Right. If you're interested, this is a good product based on your profile. Right. And this whole idea of kind of a shopping cart type of experience, but brought into the insurance and financial services space. So those are a couple that I kind of look to and look at, what they're doing and what others can kind of learn from them.
I mean, that's a really interesting point you make about that sort of cross-population and about what sectors can learn from other sectors. Has your experience always been in the insurance side of things, or have you had that sort of cross-population in your own career?
I have. So I have worked in insurance, specifically in InsurTech, for the past 7 years. Prior to that, I spent about 10 years in the financial technology space, so kind of, related. Most of my career has been spent in some kind of financial services. But I started out my career working in market research. So, there, that probably is what gave me that cross category view, because I worked with a lot of financial services brands, but I also worked with, consumer packaged goods as well, retailers. And so we were always out there looking at who was doing something interesting. And we talked a lot to our clients at that point about, yes, you're a financial brand, but what can you learn from retail? What can you learn from what consumer packaged goods are doing, which isn't always the most intuitive. But I think I have had that perspective really because of that foundation. And I've kind of kept that with me, even though I have sort of specialized more in financial services and, in insurance and InsurTech for the majority of my career.
And so tell us a little bit about openly.com.
Sure. So Openly is an InsurTech in the homeowners insurance space. And specifically, Openly serves the independent agent market. So that is still, in the US, as far as homeowners insurance and other types of insurance go, the agent channel is still, a very popular channel for homeowners insurance purchases. Certainly, other types of insurance. There are also obviously direct to consumer channels in the U.S. as well, but in particular, that independent agent market, had been underserved for many years as far as technology goes. So, they are very excited about Openly. And Openly is about to launch in our 10th state in the U.S. And there's still great demand as we continue to expand to additional states.
And that rollout process is quite interesting because I guess it is quite different. Within the UK and Ireland, we are used to that being an all Ireland or all UK wide process. But it's a very different process for you where you're approaching that on a state by state level.
Yes, exactly. I mean, generally speaking, in the US, insurance is highly regulated on a state by state level. And so, in addition to that kind of regulatory environment, that also creates nuances as far as messaging and marketing on a state by state level. So, we certainly think about the Openly brand at a high level and what that means and what we're kind of bringing to that independent agent audience. But then we also have to think about what that means on a state by state level. And there are variations in states in all kinds of ways with certainly with product, with what the environment, the geography looks like. And that also certainly impacts kind of how we go to market from a marketing perspective in those states.
Yeah. And in terms of the marketing, you touched on the messaging there as an example, as well as that sort of messaging varying, I guess sitting in Northern Ireland, my perspective would be, we'll talk about pools in Florida and in southern states. And, in the north, we'll show, we'll talk more about, the actual sort of brick built buildings and, forestry type scenes, as well as that sort of messaging approach. How are you able, or how are you thinking about approaching the messaging to make sure that you're aligning with the customers in those states, but also maintaining that sort of brand consistency?
Right. I mean, from a brand perspective, we have certain brand tenets that we consistently talk about as it relates to Openly. We really bring speed, to the independent agent audience. Our technology is market leading. I mean, the fact that they can go on and get a quote in 15 seconds is really a game changer for a lot of them. And we talk about, the comprehensive coverage that we provide. We provide a lot of coverages that are unique and that, other policies may not provide. But from there, really on a state by state level, I mean, you're right. Certainly the U.S. has a vast geography, and the housing in one state can look very different than another. So we certainly bring that into our marketing. But it is also really looking at what an individual market is like in terms of what other insurance options do folks have in that market? What might be some of the offerings that are either provided there or maybe not provided there, and that may determine what we might emphasize. So an example is it's often difficult for people to get coverage for coastal properties, and
right.
So going into a state that has a lot of coastline, a lot of coastal properties, that's something we'll really emphasize. We know that, that's something that probably a lot of agents in that state are struggling with, right? They may not have a lot of options for their clients for that type of coverage. Other states that don't have a coastline, we would emphasize some of our other benefits, perhaps a little bit more. The pools you mentioned, or Airbnb and other things like that Openly kind of brings to the table.
So Airbnb is interesting, right? Because Airbnb obviously saw a huge growth. Now that has been impacted by the pandemic, but I guess that must be a big plus. I don't know if there's too many other insurers really focusing on that sort of Airbnb sector.
I mean, right. That is unique. A lot of times, I think many carriers require you to have kind of your main dwelling insured by them in order for them to insure, an Airbnb property. But yeah, it's certainly growing, and I think poised to continue to grow, especially kind of post pandemic. I think a lot of folks, it was already popular, but I think, the travel plans of many folks have changed. I think the second home market is also booming right now, as well as just the real estate market in general in the U.S. is doing really, really well. So I think all of that is really well teed up, for Openly, and that's certainly something of interest, when we talk to agents.
And in terms of, I guess, your plans within Openly, then, they're obviously, I believe Openly are a company with massive energy. And, Ty Harris, your CEO, is very, very passionate about insurance, and that quite clearly comes across. So your plans for growth are very, defined and very definite. How are you going to roll that out with your strategic plans? What's your strategy to really kind of, because things are happening at pace, and I have no doubt that you're going to keep them going that way.
Right. We definitely have, we are in a high growth mode. We're continuing to roll out states. One thing that we have that we've done recently that's really, really helped, and I think is a game changer for Openly, is, increasing kind of our marketing automation, and just really looking at how we can focus on the touch points throughout the agent life cycle. So all the way up at the top of the funnel with acquisition, and then through that relationship ongoing. And it's not to say that the automation replaces those more personal touch points that agents have with, our account managers and the folks that they talk to every day at Openly, and really kind of help guide them. But it's really kind of a dual strategy, I think, which is, as we grow and scale, we really look at, how can we automate to just make that experience that much better? And that is true for marketing, but it's also true for just the general service experience that an agent is having as well. So it really, goes beyond just kind of marketing touch points and communications.
There's, one of the things that's not surprises me in many ways, but one of the things that's really evident, and I think maybe more so within this past 2 years, are the changes within the insurance industry. And having had experience working within the insurance industry within the UK, change was relatively slow, but that has massively increased. What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen, bearing in mind that you have had a huge amount of time within the fintech, insurtech space?
Yeah, I think the biggest change is really the use of data to help to kind of personalize the experience for the end user in a more visible way. So it's not to say that, data has always been a huge part of insurance, right? With underwriting and, really all of the analytics that go into that. I think the biggest shift is that that use of data and things like predictive analytics and use of AI, that's been brought forward to really change what that experience looks like, for a consumer, for that end user who's kind of going through the process of doing research, of applying for a policy.
And you'd mentioned previously about, Openly really are there from an agent's perspective. And that's maybe quite a good sort of juxtaposition to discuss, that the insurance market within the US is still, from a consumer perspective, consumers are still heavily reliant on trusting in independent insurance agents. And that's typically how insurance is purchased.
Yeah, I think, certainly for homeowners, that is the case. And not to say there aren't direct channels, there are, for things like homeowners, I think life insurance as well, that tend to be more complex purchases, and auto also, is in there. I think in general, there is still this reliance and trust really with the agent. And it's kind of interesting, there's been research out there kind of saying, well, that's going to change, right? That's going to change once kind of millennials, have kind of moved into this life stage where they're needing more, insurance purchases. And really interestingly, it hasn't. But I think what has changed is how the agent works with their end client, right? So it's more technology driven now. It's not necessarily, always someone coming and, sitting down with an agent. And certainly COVID also, pushed a lot of that to more of a digital advice kind of model as far as insurance agents go. And I think it's also, giving agents more technology tools that they can use, and also that they can use with kind of their end client as well. So even though there's still that, agent client relationship at the core, I think the ways they interact have changed.
Yeah. It's a valid point and really interesting that actually that's one method and one way in which it's actually helping you maintain that trust, which so often is an issue for maybe new insurtechs or people entering the market. That has to be a big issue for them, right? And that, in essence, the way you're working actually assists you with that.
Yeah, I think it's trust, right? Because at the end of the day, you're purchasing a protection product. I think the other thing that the agent provides is, somewhat of that validation that the consumer is sort of doing the right thing. So, insurance is not an everyday purchase by any means. And so, when you think about someone who's going to, whether they're purchasing a homeowner's policy or a life insurance policy, this may be something that they do, once, maybe twice, maybe, but it's unlike even other types of purchases in financial services that are more transactional, that are something you kind of see every day, right? Whether you're making purchases every day or your online banking or your credit card, you're kind of interacting with those on a daily basis. Insurance isn't something that people really think about on a daily basis, and they don't usually think about it until they actually need it, right? So they maybe need to kind of file a claim. And so I think that as far as the purchase process goes, consumers really want that validation that, am I doing the right thing, right? Is this the right coverage amount for me? What else do I need to think about or consider based on my kind of personal situation?
Yeah, right. I mean, it's one of those things that nobody really thinks about the level of insurance protection they have until something goes wrong and they need it.
Right. Exactly.
In terms of your, so you were at the Hartford before Openly?
Yes. So right before Openly, I was at a insurtech in the life insurance space called Cover. And then prior to that, I was at the Hartford, where I worked on, property and casualty. So I've kind of seen insurtech in a couple of different views.
And a couple of different, I suppose, phases as well. I was going to ask you what your biggest marketing challenge was, and I might then sort of caveat that by also saying, have you been aware of different challenges affecting insurtechs at different phases?
It's a good question. I think one of the challenges, I think, just generally with marketing and insurtechs is always kind of balancing the technology messaging with that sort of emotional or high touch messaging, right? Because at the end of the day, you're really selling protection, you're selling peace of mind. These are kind of amorphous things, right? It's not a tangible product. So, and I think as you move into the insurtech space, there's obviously a lot of great technology that goes along with that, right? There's speed and there's tools and there's processes that are market leading and fast. And so I think one of the challenges is kind of always having that balance there of balancing sort of that technical message, that high tech with the high touch. I think that's always something that I try to think about. I think the other challenge just with marketing in general, and this is not specific to insurance or insurtech, is as I go into organizations, trying to convince everyone there that almost everyone is marketing or selling, right? At every point in the company, right? It's not the folks who are creating the external facing messaging or the advertising or the large campaign, but marketing folks also really rely on, to really have a great customer experience and conversion rate is people have to have a great experience then when they get on the phone with someone, right, on the customer care team, and when they go onto the website or a portal, that everything's really working correctly and it's smooth and it's intuitive. And so at all those steps, you're kind of still marketing and communicating and messaging to folks. So that's also, I think, been a challenge I've had throughout my career is to say, look, we're all kind of, if you're at this company, we're all kind of marketing slightly different ways, different touch points. But marketing is by no means kind of just the purview of the marketing team. It's really so much broader. And just getting people to kind of think about it like that.
Yeah, no, really valid point. And I guess one of the most difficult or one of the biggest challenges is keeping everybody aligned in that messaging. Do you have to then, in many ways, almost own the internal marketing too? Making sure that the sort of the corporate communications, and sort of be seen to be doing that internally as well, and making sure that everybody's aligned on that.
I think definitely. The how a company kind of sees itself and talks about itself and talks to each other internally, and that culture that comes from that, I think that does influence kind of the external perceptions of a brand for sure. And just having that consistency is really, really important.
Yeah. And I guess, having a CEO like Ty, who is, very much almost like a thought leader in his own right, is hugely beneficial within your role, because in many ways you can also market him, right, as well as marketing Openly.
For sure. I mean, I think that's, for any brand, that's really important, kind of that thought leadership, looking internally at folks who are thought leaders in the space, other folks that have maybe really great, subject matter expertise in the space. And we certainly see that, when we have, leadership at Openly kind of go out and, participate in media interviews and podcasts and those kinds of things, that makes a big difference. Folks are really engaged with that and watching that. And, I feel like there's actually almost a new podcast or webcast that's popping up every day in the space, and especially in InsurTech. And that's been really exciting to see. And I think that, generally speaking, I think people like that. Like, I think people like that. Also, again, kind of humanizes the company, if you will, to hear a founder talking about it too, and why they started it, and what problem they kind of set out to solve.
Yeah. Have you seen, I think it's a really, really good point. There does seem to be new podcasts, new features, and InsurTech really has, I don't know, gains in popularity is not the right terminology, but, there's a lot more interest in it. Has that interest carried through to general media as well, like general press?
I think so. And it's really kind of interesting. I think that I saw more press actually around a lot of insurance topics and InsurTech, starting with COVID actually, and it was really interesting. So at the beginning, we saw at the beginning of COVID, I was I was working for an InsurTech in the life insurance space. And we saw at that point a huge spike in interest in life insurance. And the press was very involved in that. So there were a lot of articles around, if you are underinsured, this is the time to think about it. And we saw that in our data, that bump kind of happen. And now I think, with what's going on with just the real estate market right now, so that, home sales, and even in the US, even some markets that kind of before COVID were lagging a bit, are seen as, they're really like hot markets right now. And just a lot of folks kind of, I think a lot of folks just having more mobility now and reconsidering where they're living and how they're living. Yeah. And so that also ties into now kind of the, the homeowners insurance piece of it. So I do think that I've seen the general press kind of take more notice of what's going on in the sector than maybe used to happen, where it used to be more of the, a lot of the trade publications would be following and covering. And now I think that there are angles that the general press is very, interested in because of those market dynamics.
And so you're just about to roll out into your 10th state. What are agents saying? What are, those agents that you've onboarded, what are they saying?
I mean, we, Openly is, I think, very fortunate. We're passionate about collecting feedback from our agents in, multiple ways. And really a lot of the feedback we receive, I mean, it's amazing. They're just, a lot of them can't wait for us to, to launch and kind of come to their state. And then once Openly is there and kind of available to them, the feedback we get is amazing. A lot of it centers around the technology that just becomes kind of a game changer for them. And then the other piece are those coverages that we were talking about before that, help to kind of solve what was previously a problem, or an issue that they had in terms of helping their end clients find the right coverage. So the feedback we get is really overwhelming and kind of great to hear. A lot of us love to kind of, when we can, sit in on those calls, because not everyone in the company gets to hear that directly, and it's just really great to sit in on and kind of hear what an agent thinks about the platform, kind of when they're going on it. And of course, we always want to get feedback too on what comes next and how can we continue to improve on the process. But it's always really nice to hear the praise as well.
It's actually very refreshing to hear that an insurtech is getting that personal feedback. On the other side of the coin, where in the UK, we're so used to insurance comparison engines, and really there's no human contact whatsoever. Mm-hmm. It's actually really refreshing to hear about that humanization again, as you mentioned, really getting the feedback from the end users and actually speaking to people and getting that sort of direct feedback. That's so refreshing. That personalization, you mentioned personalization earlier on as one of the sort of key elements that you are really keen that you do to help, I guess, reinforce that humanization. Are there any other trends that you're seeing very specifically with regards to marketing in the insurtech sector?
In particularly, I think around marketing, what I see is brands bringing forward more of a personality. Right. And not just, it's not to say for years, there's been insurance carriers in the US that have had, in some cases, these like iconic figures that are associated with the brand and, interesting and funny commercials and that kind of thing. So they would have kind of these really entertaining marketing campaigns, but that didn't necessarily carry all the way through in every single touch point. And what I do see the insurtechs doing is really changing the language that they use to kind of talk to folks, right? Kind of really bringing that down to that, I don't know, just that plain speak for insurance. And obviously there's still all the official, documentation there, and everyone, it's very important. Obviously as a protection product, to have all of that, well documented, but just to kind of, in those upfront communications, try to use, language that folks can kind of wrap their head around. Yeah. I think that's something I really see happening more and more. And also even a little bit of humor, appropriately done, right? So again, you're in insurance, you're always balancing like, okay, this is a brand that needs to be perceived as reliable, as, it's a protection product, right? That you are protecting things that are very important to folks in their lives, and have real value. And so that's a big responsibility, but also just letting a little bit of that personality show through. So that's a trend I've seen in marketing in particular that's been kind of refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting when you compare that to some of the more traditional maybe brokers that don't have the same outlook and maybe don't certainly have the same systems and
right.
One of the burning questions that I'd love to ask, if you don't mind, is what is the one thing that you'd like to achieve this year, 2021?
I think the biggest thing is I'm getting settled into my new role at Openly and working with the team here. The biggest thing I'm focused on now is kind of our, continuing to grow the company and execute on our growth plans for the year. And that's really exciting. We have, certainly a lot going on, and our team is kind of expanding here by the day, which is very exciting. But that's what I'm really focused on for kind of the remainder of the year is, working together with the team here to continue to grow on the great trajectory that the company's had so far.
And just on a suppose workplace level, are you all working, independently for now? Are there plans to return to office at any point?
So right now, Openly is primarily kind of a remote first company, and really was also pre-COVID as well. So there's a kind of a small kind of a small office in Boston, but other than that, it's exciting. We have folks who are all over the U.S. in all different time zones, which is something we always have to kind of keep in mind. That I think obviously more and more folks are working like that. Openly probably had the advantage that they were already working like that, or the majority of folks were working like that even pre-COVID. So it wasn't as much of a shift as it was for other organizations. I think there's it allows us, I think, also from a talent perspective to. It's exciting. You can kind of hire folks from anywhere, and they don't necessarily have to move.
Yeah, and I guess one of the great things about that, as you say, is the technology. Traditionally, in Northern Ireland, if I may, a lot of the traditional insurers within Northern Ireland and the UK quite often will have branches. They'll have these huge computers sort of strapped into networks and so on. But I guess, the technology you're providing to those agents is freed up from all of that, right? They don't have to sort of access that. They can access that anywhere and provide quotes to their client anywhere.
Exactly. The agent, and I think that has been a shift just in general with, agents are also working differently. I mean, some of them are certainly working in offices, but that doesn't always mean that a lot of cases, it doesn't mean that their client is necessarily even coming into the office. They do a lot by phone, they do a lot anywhere. But yes, I mean, the idea is an agent could, be doing this from their laptop, from their phone, from wherever they are, and being able to go on and, again, they can get these quotes in, 15 seconds. So wow. It's very portable. It can be wherever they want to be. And then there's obviously flexibility in then, how they also work with their clients and kind of share the information with their clients.
And so I guess that benefit to the agent rolls on to the consumer too, right? Because the consumers then being, the quotes are facilitated by the agent who is able to get them in 15 seconds and back. And they're bindable, right? So those 15-second quotes, those are bindable quotes.
Yeah. So the consumer, I mean, obviously that's the big thing, right? I think in InsurTech in general, that, certainly the really does benefit both of them is the speed. When you compare to like what the process used to be not so long ago, right, it would have been taken far longer, would have been very, paper-based primarily still, just kind of clunky, right? And so made for this not very enjoyable experience. So yeah, certainly I think, that benefit of speed benefits both, right? The agent is busy. They're kind of, often working with multiple clients. They can just very quickly go on and get these quotes. And then sort of that end client who's kind of the, homeowner or prospective homeowner, they don't have to wait, right, to kind of see what's available. And I think it is a game changer for both.
And last question, and this is for all those sort of audience members here in the marketing sphere, or even those that are considering going into the marketing sphere. What advice would you give to somebody who wanted to become a marketer in the InsurTech space?
I would say, two things. I would say one, like I said before, the cross-category learning. So don't just look at examples kind of what's going on in a narrow category, but try to be open-minded. Right. And then I think the other thing I would say is just in general that, marketing is an iterative process, right? You're constantly testing, you're constantly learning, and that is just part of the process. So if you're expecting to kind of, and I think especially in InsurTech, because it's changing so rapidly at the same time, so it's what you're doing one day can look very different from what you're going to be doing, 3 months from now, when you have kind of learned so much from what's going on in the marketplace, what's going on with your customers. So just kind of having that flexibility to know that, you're not gonna have all the answers. The answers are constantly changing. It's really kind of your customers that are giving you the answers, right? They'll let you know if something isn't working, and then you're then sort of challenged to have to adapt and kind of be creative, and that's where that creativity comes in.
Yeah, great. Noreen, it's been fascinating speaking to you today. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And I think that one of the key points that really is coming out of this is, whilst InsurTech, the tech itself is very, very fundamental. What's also fundamental is that feedback loop, number one, and how that messaging is kind of put back out there again, in your marketing and to position your organization. So I thank you again, and I wish you all the best of luck in your new role, and look forward to seeing the strategy roll out.
Thank you so much, Joe. I appreciate it. It was great.